Welcome to Front Forum Focus. I'm George Karani, your host, and today we are diving into the future of energy transformation with Matt Larsson. Matt has over 2 decades of experience in the industry, being the founder of Global Energy Transformation. Um, he's dedicated to advancing the global transformation to sustainable energy. Matt, let's dive into a bit of your personal journey. What led you to found Global Transformation Energy, and how did you start into the your sustain?
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. I started more than 20 years ago, and the reason I started was read about the peak in oil production that was seen as imminent at the time, and I realized that if countries want to change to new transportation systems on a large scale, they need to do so through programs that involve not only changing the vehicles but also that change the infrastructure of, for example, power production, power distribution. So I realized that with my background as a business consultant, and I had studied and worked with IT systems and change management related to the implementation of those, I realized that I had the basic knowledge to help analyze and help drive this type of change forward.
You are in the policy industry, so I think now these types of change require maybe huge. Policy is like a challenge to this type of change. So what do you think? Do you see maybe policy becoming more friendly to sustainable change, and maybe how fast will it come to maybe other continents like Africa, where still policy is still developed?
Yes, I see that here in Europe and in the EU, big decisions have been made to change transportation systems to electric vehicles, and big decisions have been made to change production and distribution systems to a circular economy where uh, resources are used over and over again instead of just once and then discarded as waste. So is a political support for these types of measures, but unfortunately, these decisions are not, well, they don't involve the systems change that will be needed in order to change these large systems. They focus on changing the vehicles or changing some other products like replacing plastics, but they don't focus on the entire supply chains or infrastructure systems that will be needed in order to generate enough electricity to run a lot of vehicles on electricity, or to expand or reinforce the power grids and transmission grids that will be necessary to distribute all the power to where the vehicles need to be charged. So there is a positive intention there, but there is a lack of systemic insight among politicians, and also, more surprisingly, among industry leaders and people like uh, well, uh, managers of the big automotive companies and the managers of utilities, etc. Everyone knows a lot about their own business, but few understand the entire systems that will need to be built in order to go through with these big systemic changes.
Yeah, so many regions worldwide are setting ambitious targets, and yet, this transition faces like significant hurdles. What are the key challenges mainly being faced in the electric vehicle industry that need to be, urgently addressed?
Well, the big challenges that need to be addressed are um, the volume of investment that will be needed. And the politicians, business leaders need to make a lot more money available for these changes, like John F. Kennedy did in with the Apollo program. He didn't just say we need to send a man to the moon in 10 years or within this decade. He actually invested a lot of money and made it available to NASA to develop the space rocket and the moon lander and the launch pad and the well the everything else that was needed in order to go to the moon. In this case, have been these big decisions, but very little money is available to finance all the development and all the reinforcement activities and expansion activities that need to be done. And there is also a lack of people with the right competence to drive these systemic changes forward. There are a lot of experts in different industries, a lot of competence on vehicle development, vehicle sales, utilities, uh, power grids, um, power plants, and different technologies for power generation like wind, uh, nuclear, etc. But there is very little understanding of the entire system and how the big programs that will be necessary to run this change will have to be organized and financed. So there's a big need for example, electrification strategies, people who can develop strategies and take a system view of the change, and electrification architects, people who can draw up the detailed maps of the systems that will be needed in order to make these changes possible. Yes, they could be, and they need to be, because as you know, oil, petroleum is a finite resource and it will not last forever. And we are approaching the peak in oil production, and oil production can't grow indefinitely. So there is a need to develop a new system. And the only new type of fuel that is possible to use and that is possible to produce on a large enough scale is electricity. There is not enough grain in the world to both supply for humans to eat and to also use to produce biofuels. And there is not enough forest in the world to make it possible to use that for fuel production. So we need to use electricity, but we need to develop these systems in such a way that they can handle the huge amounts of electricity that will be needed in order to change to electric vehicles in Europe, in the EU, and in the UK. There will be a need for 50% of the present power generation. 50% of the present power that's generated within the EU will have to be used for electric vehicles in case all vehicles would be electric. And that is a lot. And within the time frame of the decisions made by the EU, uh, this amount of electricity could not be built from scratch. So there needs to be a plan and a pace for the change that allows both the expansion and reinforcement of systems, and also allows the expansion of vehicle fleets. At present, the EU has decided to ban the sales of new petrol and diesel cars from 2035, and to phase out diesel trucks from 2030, which effectively mean that they need to be that this phase out of diesel trucks needs to start immediately to build production of resources and to build demand and so on. And so infrastructure expansion and infrastructure reinforcement and the building of new power generation on a large scale will have to start immediately as well in order to make it possible to drive the change forward and to make enough electricity and the grid capacity available in 10 years' time when electric vehicle fleets will be really big.
Yeah. So I think they have, you know, also like we are seeing like some manufacturers of electric vehicles trying to solve this problem of, power generation. I think we have seen some, some innovations of maybe vehicles which are trying to use solar energy and maybe other alternatives. So how do you think these solutions will be integrated to our current solutions that we are currently?
Yes, it is important to consider that power grids need to be balanced at all time, and to realize that solar power and wind power are intermittent energy sources. They don't generate electricity at all times. Wind power only when there's wind, and solar power only during the day, or even here in Sweden during days when there is enough sun to generate sufficient amounts of electricity. So there will be a need for some base load power to be used to generate and to support the supply of solar and the supply of wind power. As it seems, the only such source could be nuclear power because there is not enough hydroelectric resources or other types of resources that could actually balance the huge amounts of wind and solar that are delivered at certain times. There is a big need for wind power. There is a big need for solar power, but there is also a need for a resource for baseload resource that could deliver at all times, uh, and that would probably, as I see it, have to be nuclear power. The electric vehicles require much fewer hours of production compared to petrol and diesel vehicles. Actually, an electric car requires 40% fewer hours of production. As you know, many of the parts in electric vehicles are completely different from the parts that are present in petrol and diesel cars. And the same is true for electric trucks. Different parts and a lot fewer hours of manufacturing is needed. So this means that production will move to other parts. So people who work with the manufacturing of parts or vehicles for petrol and diesel vehicles, they will be let off and made redundant in many cases at an accelerating pace, and instead there will be jobs created in power areas for electric motors, electric grid components, for installation of electric grids. And these companies are located in other parts of the world or in other parts of Europe, other parts of the United States, etc. There will be a need for massive relocation of workers from different areas, and there will be a need for very big training programs of workers and uh, white collar uh, white collar workers as well, who will need to change jobs, learn new skills, and many people will have to move to new regions where they can find jobs instead of the ones that they have to leave. And we will there will be a movement and a difficulty for people who with mechanical engineering and mechanical production skills to find new jobs in their present areas, because it's unlikely that new demand will be created in the way that at the pace that the demand from the automotive industry will decline. So over the coming decades, there is likely to be a big shift in labor markets and in training needs and in many areas. And these changes have not been foreseen by governments. They have not set aside resources for these training programs. They have not started to prepare universities or different schools to train enough people in the new skills that will be needed.
Yeah, so let's talk about the current businesses who are actually in the automotive industry. I think the automotive industry is quite massive at the moment, having their maybe 1.5 billion vehicles in the room. So how can existing businesses start adopting to the sustainability trend?
Yes, that is a very good question, and the the situation is getting more complex as the plans that have been made for the change are not entirely realistic. As I indicated before, there is not enough electricity, not enough power generation capacity, not enough power grid capacity, and not enough production capacity, and not enough competence available to go through with this change at the pace that's that has been decided. So that will so up to every company manager, every CEO to speculate about how can this change pan out? How will the change progress? What will happen within the next 5 years? When will it become clear to decision makers, to people in general, to workers that different parts of this cannot be completed in the time frame set out by the politicians. So and that creates a big uh, uncertainty. And as we see now that the engagement by Elon Musk in American politics has changed the demand for and has opened the door for other companies to grow. Uh, there are a lot of different aspects to this uncertainty. We don't know exactly how fast this change will make progress, how fast this the different aspects of this change, like electric car sales and growth in different areas, expansion of power generation, expansion of power grids, expansion of charging infrastructure. We don't know how fast these different things will move forward. So it's we can't just make, or companies shouldn't just make decisions based on the political decisions that have been made and the political goals. They need to evaluate how much of this will be possible to achieve, how fast will it go, and what type of change do we need to prepare for. And different companies are doing this in different ways. Like some companies have announced plans to stop making petrol and diesel cars. Companies need to make evaluations of the plans, what are the realism, and they need to make decisions based on the conclusions from this.
Super. I think that's like a great thing that companies should start. I think that's also like aligns with what we are doing also with for our focus, helping businesses identify sustainability metrics and also like measure their impact. So what metrics do you see businesses being important for businesses to measure as we go into this transition where we can also see regulation coming in, and also like there's a huge adoption that businesses will take.
Yes, that's very interesting because in the EU, all countries, or the EU has made the same decisions to ban the sales of new petrol and diesel cars and to rapidly phase out diesel trucks. They have made the same decisions for all countries, and they have set the same goals. But in reality, the opportunity for different countries to fulfill these goals or go through with these changes are very different. So there are more affluent countries in the EU that have the opportunity to change faster, and there are some less affluent countries that have different opportunities, and there are countries that have access to large amounts of electricity, for example, that could change faster, like Sweden. Sweden and Finland have the biggest amount of electricity available per person in the EU. And so these countries could move faster than perhaps Poland or Italy. Italy only has one third of the electricity available per person that Sweden has, for example, and Germany has 50% of the electricity available. And these countries also have bigger populations, so the investments in order to make enough electricity available will be huge, because they will not only need to make large amounts of electricity available for, say, 10 million people like Sweden, but Germany will have to make enough electricity available for 85 million people. So that 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 will require a huge expansion of both power generation of and power grids and so on. So the metrics that need to be measured are like growth potential and actual growth in different countries, and we need to realize that the growth in some countries is slow because of certain difficulties. Perhaps as is not enough are not enough financial resources available. Perhaps there's not enough electricity available. Perhaps there is not the trust in the power grid and the power generation that we have here in Sweden, for example. So the EU must adapt decisions to the actual circumstances in different countries and say, the EU needs to move forward at different speeds in different areas, and or they need to set the pace not by the countries like Sweden and Finland that have the best opportunities, but they need to relate it to the countries that have have less good opportunities.
Yes, that brings us to a really good place where now we can see that there are really you know, ambitious targets that governments have set. But really, I would like to understand now with, some of those targets being maybe closer than we think, maybe let's say like 2050, countries setting like goals like to go net zero. So what are the risks when we don't hit those goals?
Yes, there are one type of risk connected to global warming and to emissions of carbon dioxide that we don't manage to reduce the emissions rapidly enough, and we don't manage to change transportation systems in such a way that we can make transportation sustainable. So that is that is a big risk, and we will not meet the ambitious targets that have been set by the EU and by national governments and so on. Another risk that's related to the aspect that oil is not is a finite resource, and we need to implement new fuels, not only in order to reduce the carbon footprint, but to also to make sure that we have access to sufficient transportation resources in the future. That risk is that if we don't change rapidly enough, uh, our transportation systems may break down if we don't have enough vehicles and enough fuel to fuel those vehicles. So if we primarily have petrol and diesel vehicles, we cannot, and the oil production starts to decline, we will not be able to run our transportation systems to the full. And if we have a lot of electric vehicles, but we don't have enough electricity to fuel them, we can't run those systems either to the extent that we are used to. So the risk that we don't fulfill the goals to create a sustainable world, and also to the risk that we will not have sufficient transportation capacity in the future to cover our needs.
Yes. So I think also like maybe there might be a risk to the countries that are producing oil as their main like um, economical products. So like now like in the future where we can say like the grid is much complex and can support maybe continents. How do you see countries collaborating and governments collaborating to make this achievable?
Well, there is not, I believe, enough collaboration around these things. And you are absolutely right in that there's a risk to countries that are at present producers. But oil demand will be high enough for a very long time to not make that a big risk. The bigger risk is like Norway and the UK, where oil production has declined, not because of reduced demand, but because of reduced supply. There is not enough oil left in the ground to continue production. So UK oil production has more than halved, and Norwegian oil production, I think, has gone down by 2/3, something like that. I haven't checked the exact figures lately, but uh, there is this risk. Definitely, governments need to collaborate much more in order to expand power generation and expand uh, different aspects of the new systems rapidly enough. Yes, well, the challenges are many, and there are traditional methods that we could approach this by, methods we have applied in other, or countries have applied in other situations, like the Apollo program and other large scale and fast track development and change programs. Change management principles have been developed for companies over the past 30 or 40 years, and they are applied on a large scale in companies where if companies want to change, which they many do or have done in the past. General Electric is a company that has been well known for its large scale change programs, and they have entirely changed their lines of business over the past 30 or 40 years in a very structured and organized manner. And governments and companies need to apply similar types of change management principles where they take a holistic view of all the areas that need to change, all the areas where investments are needed, and look at and plan for all the different measures that need to be taken and the different change activities that need to be initiated and managed in order for the change to succeed. So there are principles that can be applied or that need to be applied in this as well, because it's a far too complex change to make it possible just by without any management or organization of the change process. There are literally tens of thousands of different organizations, tens of thousands of different companies, public organizations in Europe, in the US, in Africa, or in Japan, Asia, that need to be involved in these changes. Automotive companies, utilities, municipalities, governments, they all need to take different roles. They all need to contribute in different ways to this change. And they will not be, all of those will not be able to take the right decisions, start the right activities at the right time, invest the right amount of money, do the right things, unless this change process is managed in some way. Yes, it could. I've been looking at the overall perspective of the big decisions that need to be made. And unfortunately, governments and large companies have failed to take in the large perspective. And AI could help humans to analyze these things. Uh, governments and companies could, in the absence of people who have looked into this and who have analyzed this for 20 years, like I have done, or for 5 years even, in the absence of those people, they could use AI instead. And at present, I believe you couldn't just ask AI what needs to be done in order to drive the change to electric vehicles forward. You need to break it down, and you need to ask AI more specific questions, like how much electricity will be needed to drive all cars in this country on electricity. How could we change, how could we change our grids to support electric vehicle fleets? What would be the best architecture for grid solutions that could facilitate the change to electric vehicles at financially advantageous pace, etc. And you could put the answers to these questions together and form of change plan. And I think AI, if we want to succeed with this, AI would need to help us in different ways, take the help of AI. But we also run a risk then that AI will take over and that there will be too few human experts who understand this also in the future, and we will become entirely reliant on AI for this type of analysis in this area, because there are not enough human experts who can do this analysis. And as you know, AI can do it very rapidly, sometimes not accurately enough, but we can help also spot mistakes that AI makes, and we can help it, and we can patch here and there to actually make the responses from AI more relevant and more precise, etc. So there is a need for interaction. There is a need for supervision of AI in order to use it and management of the AI analysis. But it could help. But it would also come at the risk of not developing enough human expertise in this. Well, I'd like to take a positive view of this, and I hope that we can use AI without becoming slaves under the technology, and with have humans manage AI rather than the opposite, have AI manage humans. And I think if we use AI in an intelligent way, we can harness the power of AI without succumbing to the risks of AI that some experts have warned of. I think it could be a really valuable source of problem solving capacity and intellectual ability for us. And I think AI could help us drive this change to a sustainable society and find ways to drive this change forward in ways that perhaps we have not managed to do, humans have not managed to do so far. Because all these changes are really complex. There are many organizations, many people with different competencies that need to be involved. And we need to develop the skills and the competencies for all these um, all these changes among humans. And we must not become entirely reliant on AI, because that would be I believe, a very dangerous situation. Given that would be possible, I think can move forward at a more structured pace, in a more structured way than uh, uh, than the change is driven at present, and that governments need to take into account the need to develop the infrastructure around electric vehicle systems, and the different areas of investment that will be necessary. I mean, if you consider the number of chargers and the amount of electricity that will be needed along the most busy traffic routes in Europe, where 250,000 vehicles may pass every day, and how many chargers that will be needed in those places in order to or along those routes, or how many chargers will be needed in the busiest logistics areas, like here in Europe, Rotterdam or Hamburg, Duisburg in the Rhine-Ruhr area. How many vehicles will need to be charged in those areas in a given day in the near future? That needs to be considered. And if governments manage to take this into account and develop a plan for the change that is realistic and that allows all the different parts of systems to develop in um, in a concerted manner, we can look forward to a really positive and sustainable future, I think. Well, I'm afraid we are trying to do too many things at the same time, and it will, as we have a challenge planning and preparing for the change to electric vehicles, road vehicles, and we have not started to realize how much electricity will be needed in order to charge cars, trucks, and buses. Uh, we need to take into account, if we want to change aviation as well. Uh, we need to take into account how much electricity will be needed to take a Boeing 747 or 777 to from New York to San Francisco, and how could we possibly make that amount of electricity available for hundreds of airplanes at airports over a few every hour of the day? And I mean, we could of course start to develop electric, or we have started to develop electric small electric planes, and they work well for short distance routes. But the possibility of changing uh, large passenger airplanes to electric over the coming decades does not seem to be very realistic. I think too large amounts of electricity will be needed, and extreme investments will be necessary at airports and around airports in power generation to make it possible to even electrify a small fraction of airplanes. And it's even if we could make batteries light enough to make it possible to power large airplanes, I don't think we would be able to expand power generation or power grids enough to make this realistic. Yes, the benefits, that is really difficult. Well, it's a multifaceted question because consumers they both like inexpensive products and expensive systems, and they need inexpensive products and inexpensive systems because the majority of people don't have billions of dollars, and the majority earns relatively small salaries, and there is a risk also that AI will take over jobs and reduce job opportunities. So there is a need for technologies, transportation technologies, to be inexpensive, make it possible to transport things at low cost. And at present, operating electric vehicles is more expensive, and it's uncertain how rapidly the cost of electric transportation will go down, because so far people have calculated, experts as well have calculated with using existing power installations, existing power resources to charge electric vehicles. And those are, to a large extent, they have been written off and they are available at a relatively low cost. But now we're looking at the need to expand power generation on a large scale. We need to build new power plants. We need to expand wind parks, solar, build more solar cells, and and that will require a very big investment. So that is will potentially increase power prices and change many things in our economy. So in order for the majority of people to be able to buy electric cars, use electric cars, we need power to remain inexpensive, or even in countries where power is expensive today, it needs to become less expensive. In Sweden, where I live, power is relatively inexpensive still. But in Germany, they pay 3 times the price of each kilowatt hour that we do in Sweden. And in other places, I'm sure they pay even more. So so there is a big need to make these overall calculations and look at the system aspects. How much power do we need? How much power do we have? How much investment will we need to make? And what amounts do we need to invest in new power plants, in new wind and solar resources, etc. How will this affect power prices? Everyone needs to contribute in different ways, and this is um, the challenge here that I've touched upon a few times, that this change is very complex. It will involve hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of different organizations and companies. I mean, only in Sweden we have more than 250 utilities, and each one of those will need to make investments in different areas. We have a number of automotive companies. We have 290 municipalities. We have regions, have operators of charging infrastructure. We have real estate companies that need to invest in it and install chargers, and so on. So, and we have 10 million people in Sweden. We have 8 billion people on the planet who need to as much as possible change their ways to actually use more electric transportation and reduce their dependence on petrol and diesel transportation. So a lot of people will need to make changes of different magnitude, and a lot of people will need to contribute in different ways to this development. And most of the people who need to contribute don't know at present what they need to do, or how they can afford it, or how much money they will need to make available to invest, or what aspects of their life they need to change. Bye, and thank you for inviting me.
Yes.